You see Alfie, a scruffy terrier mix, sitting patiently by an empty park bench, his gaze fixed on the worn path. He's not waiting for a ball or even a treat. His eyes, deep and knowing, seem to hold an ancient secret, a silent pact with a man whose life he fundamentally reshaped. You'd never imagine what this dog has been through, or how this story will change how you see friendship. Before you dive into the story, hit like and subscribe if you love dogs. And let us know in the comments below, what's your favorite dog story? Or tell us about your own beloved pet. The silence in Arthur's apartment was a familiar cloak, heavy and comforting in its predictability. He liked the quiet. He cultivated it. His days unfolded with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Coffee at 6:15 a.m., the morning news until 7 a.m., then a walk to the small bakery for a single croissant. He worked from home, a data analyst by trade, and his colleagues existed as voices through a headset, faces on a screen. There was no one to disturb the meticulous order he'd built around himself, no one to disrupt the carefully constructed calm that kept the world at bay. This routine was his fortress, a defense against the unpredictable currents of life that had, in the past, swept him far from shore. He was safe here, tucked away. It was on one of his precise morning walks that the disruption began. Not a loud, jarring disruption, but a subtle shift in the landscape, like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending out ever-widening ripples. He saw the dog first as a smudge of brown against the gray pavement, huddled close to the ornate iron fence of the old public gardens. It was small, even for a terrier mix, with fur matted and dull, and eyes that held a profound weariness. Alfie. The name came to him later, when the dog was no longer just a smudge. At that moment, it was simply a dog. And Arthur, a man who meticulously avoided anything that might demand an emotional response, felt a flicker of something unbidden. It was not pity, not exactly, but a recognition of isolation. He, too, understood what it meant to be alone in a vast, indifferent world. He walked past, as he always did. His routine did not include stray dogs. But the next day, the smudge was still there, and the next. It was always in the same spot, tucked away but visible, a silent sentinel. Arthur found himself, against his own rigid habits, slowing his pace just slightly, his gaze drifting towards the small, still form. He never stopped, never spoke, but a peculiar dialogue began to unfold in the periphery of his awareness. The dog, Alfie, never barked, never whined, never approached. He simply was. His presence was a quiet question, a gentle challenge to Arthur's carefully maintained solitude. One morning, a week into this unspoken vigil, a profound observation struck Arthur. Dogs, he mused, often communicate not through grand gestures, but through subtle shifts in posture, the almost imperceptible movement of an ear, or the depth of their gaze. Alfie was a master of this silent language. There was an intelligence in his tired eyes, a quiet dignity that belied his circumstances. He wasn't begging. He was simply waiting. For what? Arthur couldn't fathom. Perhaps for the world to notice him. Perhaps for a kindness he no longer expected. What truly defines courage in the face of indifference? Is it the loud roar, or the quiet, persistent presence? The change in Arthur began subtly. He found himself thinking about the dog when he was at his desk, his gaze occasionally drifting to the window. The precise contours of his day started to blur. One afternoon, while preparing his usual solitary dinner, he found himself pouring an extra portion of plain boiled chicken. He told himself it was an experiment, a study in canine behavior. Of course, it certainly wasn't compassion. The next morning, the chicken found its way into a small, clean plastic container in his pocket. When he approached the gardens, Alfie was there, as always. Arthur paused, heart thudding with an unfamiliar rhythm. He bent down, placed the container on the ground a few feet from the dog, and then quickly straightened, walking away without a backward glance. He didn't want to see. He didn't want the obligation of seeing. But the next morning, the container was gone, and Alfie was still there. A little less huddled, perhaps, a fraction more alert. A tiny, almost imperceptible wag of his tail, barely a tremor, caught Arthur's eye. It was a moment of quiet joy, a small comfort in the grand scheme of things. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but it spoke volumes. This subtle acknowledgement, this shared secret, was the first thread of a silent pact. A silent pact that changed a man's lonely world forever, though he didn't know it yet. For weeks, this became their routine. Food, silence, a subtle acknowledgement. Arthur never tried to touch Alfie, and Alfie never attempted to approach Arthur. Their bond was built on trust observed from a distance, a respect for each other's boundaries. Yet, a warmth began to seep into the cracks of Arthur's carefully constructed isolation. He found himself smiling faintly as he thought of the little dog, a warmth that had been absent from his life for too long. He started to wonder about Alfie's past, about the journey that had brought him to this quiet corner of the city. Does destiny play a role in their meeting, or was it simply a coincidence? One evening, a sudden, fierce downpour caught Arthur off guard on his way home. He hurried, pulling his jacket tighter, but then he thought of Alfie. The dog was always there, rain or shine. Was he still there now, exposed to the deluge? A strange, insistent urgency bubbled within him, an emotion he hadn't felt in years. Concern. He found himself turning back, retracing his steps, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. When he reached the gardens, Alfie was indeed there, tucked under a small, struggling bush, shivering. Without thinking, Arthur took off his own jacket, a good, waterproof one, and laid it gently over the trembling dog. He didn't wait for a reaction. He simply walked away, the rain soaking through his shirt, a strange lightness in his chest. This small act of unexpected kindness was a revelation, not for Alfie, but for Arthur. He realized, with a jolt, that he had extended himself, truly cared for something beyond his own meticulously managed existence. The feeling was frightening, but also exhilarating. He slept deeper that night than he had in years. The rain-soaked jacket was still draped over Alfie the next morning when Arthur arrived, a silent testament to the night before. Alfie was no longer shivering. In fact, he was doing something entirely new. He was watching Arthur approach with an almost palpable intensity, his head cocked slightly, one ear perked. It wasn't the usual passive observation. It was an active, engaged gaze. Arthur felt a flicker of something close to pride, a sensation he hadn't truly experienced since landing his first big client years ago. This tiny dog, this creature of the streets, was acknowledging him. He replenished the water in the small dish he'd started bringing and placed a fresh portion of chicken down. Alfie ate slowly, deliberately, his eyes occasionally flicking up to meet Arthur's. There was no rush, no frantic gobbling, just a quiet acceptance. It was as if Alfie understood the ritual as well as Arthur did, perhaps even better. He understood the unspoken promises, the gentle boundaries. This was a relationship built on respectful distance, a shared understanding that words would only complicate. It made Arthur think about how many human interactions are drowned out by too many words, by too much noise. Sometimes, the most profound connections are forged in silence. As the days turned into weeks, Alfie began to exhibit a subtle shift in his routine. He no longer simply waited in his spot. Sometimes, when Arthur approached, Alfie would be a few feet away, seemingly observing something interesting in the grass. Then, with a casual glance back at Arthur, he would begin to walk, not away, but parallel to Arthur's usual path. It was a silent invitation, a gentle nudge towards companionship. Arthur, ever the creature of habit, found himself subtly altering his own route, following Alfie's lead without consciously deciding to. He'd find himself strolling a little further into the park, past the familiar benches and into areas he'd previously ignored. This small act of following, of ceding control, felt oddly liberating. It was as if Alfie was silently telling him, "There's more to this world than your four walls and your routine." One morning, Alfie didn't simply walk parallel. He stopped, looking back at Arthur, and then sat, lifting a paw tentatively. Arthur hesitated, then knelt down. He examined the paw, careful and slow. A tiny thorn was embedded in the pad. Alfie remained still, trusting. With a pair of tweezers Arthur always carried, for splinters, he'd told himself, not dog paws, he gently extracted the thorn. Alfie licked his hand once, a soft, warm touch that sent a jolt through Arthur. It was a moment of profound intimacy, a quiet trust extended and received. This wasn't just a dog now. This was a sentient being who trusted him implicitly. How many times do we miss the profound acts of trust in our daily lives simply because they come without fanfare? Arthur knew deep down that dogs possess an incredible ability to read human emotions, often sensing distress or fear long before a person expresses it verbally. Alfie, in particular, seemed attuned to Arthur's inner landscape. When Arthur felt a familiar pang of loneliness, a residue from a past he tried to outrun, Alfie would often sit closer or rest his head on his paws, watching him with those deep, knowing eyes. It was never intrusive, never demanding, just a quiet, reassuring presence that seemed to say, "I see you." This profound understanding was a balm to Arthur's soul, a comfort he hadn't realized he desperately needed. He found himself talking to Alfie more, not in full sentences, but in quiet murmurs. "Another long day, huh, boy?" Or, "Just a bit more, and then we're home." Alfie would respond with a soft sigh, or a gentle nudge of his head against Arthur's knee. It was a conversation of souls, not of words. One afternoon, Arthur was particularly stressed with a complex data migration at work. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the creeping anxiety. He took a break, stepping out onto his small balcony overlooking the park. Below, Alfie was curled in his usual spot, seemingly asleep. But as Arthur watched, Alfie stirred, lifted his head, and looked directly up at the balcony, meeting Arthur's gaze. A subtle, almost imperceptible tilt of Alfie's head, and then he lay back down, a quiet presence of calm. Arthur felt the tension ease, just slightly. It was an unexpected moment of healing, a reminder that he wasn't truly alone, even in his moments of quiet panic. The mystery of Alfie's past, however, continued to tug at Arthur's mind. He saw a scar near Alfie's left ear, a faded line that hinted at some old trauma. There were times when Alfie would flinch at a sudden loud noise, or cower briefly if a large man walked past too quickly. These were fleeting moments, quickly recovered from, but they spoke of a history, a life lived before Arthur. Was he abandoned? Abused? The thoughts brought a fierce protectiveness to Arthur's heart, an emotion he was surprised to discover he possessed in such intensity. He wanted to shield Alfie from any further pain, to give him a safe, predictable existence, the very thing Arthur had sought for himself. What kind of journey brings a creature to such a state of quiet resilience? He started leaving a small, comfortable blanket for Alfie, tucked away in a sheltered spot under the large oak tree near the park entrance. He'd find it neatly folded the next morning, as if Alfie was returning it. This small quirk, this almost human-like tidiness, brought a quiet chuckle to Arthur's lips. "You're a fastidious fellow, aren't you, Alfie?" he'd murmur. It was a gentle joke, a shared secret between them. Alfie didn't seem to mind the blanket, though, and eventually Arthur found it less neatly folded, more like a cozy nest. Progress, he thought with a wry smile. As days turned into weeks, Arthur's world began to expand, subtly but surely. The rigid lines of his routine softened. He found himself looking forward to his mornings, not just for the croissant, but for the quiet communion with Alfie. He started noticing the small details of the park, the way the light filtered through the leaves, the chirping of the birds, the faint scent of damp earth after a rain. These were sensory details he'd previously ignored, lost in his own structured existence. Now, through Alfie's silent companionship, he was beginning to truly see the world around him. Remember the dog's sad but determined eyes? That feeling of quiet strength would soon be reflected in Arthur as he found his own determination to protect this newfound connection. The unwritten rules of their silent pact continued to evolve, a delicate dance of observation and response. Arthur noticed that Alfie, after eating, would often nose a small, weathered tennis ball from beneath a nearby bush. It was old, faded, and clearly well-loved. Alfie would then nudge it with his snout towards Arthur, a clear, unspoken invitation. Arthur, initially hesitant, found himself kicking the ball gently, then with a little more force. Alfie, despite his small stature, was surprisingly agile, his scruffy body a blur of motion as he retrieved it. Their games were never long or boisterous. They were quiet exchanges, a shared moment of simple joy. Arthur, a man who hadn't truly played in decades, felt a strange lightness bubbling within him. He even found himself, on occasion, attempting a subtle trick kick, much to Alfie's apparent delight, expressed through a joyful, silent wiggle. Was this what pure, unadulterated happiness felt like? A quiet connection over a worn-out tennis ball? One crisp morning, as they were in the midst of their ball game, a sudden, piercing siren ripped through the park. Alfie, who usually remained composed, immediately tensed. His ears flattened, his tail tucked, and he cowered, pressing himself low to the ground. It was an involuntary, raw display of fear, a profound, visceral reaction that stunned Arthur. He knelt instantly, placing a comforting hand on Alfie's trembling back. He felt the rapid thud of the dog's heart against his palm. This was not the calm, resilient Alfie he knew. This was a creature haunted by something, a sound, a memory that triggered deep-seated terror. It was a profound and unexpected emotional moment for Arthur, seeing Alfie's vulnerability laid bare. What truly defines courage? Is it the absence of fear, or the willingness to push through it? Arthur spoke to him in soft, reassuring tones, his voice a balm against the sharp edge of the siren. It's okay, boy. Just a siren. You're safe now. He continued to stroke Alfie's fur, feeling the tremors gradually subside. It took several minutes before Alfie's breathing normalized, and he slowly uncurled. When his eyes met Arthur's, there was a glimmer of something akin to shame, quickly replaced by a profound, grateful understanding. It was clear then that dogs, with their acute senses, often experience the world with far greater intensity than humans, making them susceptible to sensory overload or heightened fear responses to certain stimuli. This incident was a stark reminder that Alfie carried unseen burdens, whispers of a past that lingered in the shadows of his quiet demeanor. That day, Arthur understood a new layer of their unspoken contract. It wasn't just about food and quiet companionship. It was about protection, about being a safe harbor. He started consciously avoiding loud areas of the park, choosing quieter paths, always aware of Alfie's reactions. He even bought a small, discreet dog whistle, not to command Alfie, but to offer a different, gentler sound to cut through any unexpected noise that might trigger fear. It was a subtle joke, perhaps, a silent communication that he was always thinking of Alfie's comfort. He also noticed other subtle changes in Alfie's behavior. Sometimes, Alfie would sit at the edge of the path, looking intently into the woods that bordered the park, a low, almost imperceptible growl rumbling in his chest. Arthur would follow his gaze, seeing nothing, but sensing the dog's heightened awareness. Alfie wasn't just a quiet companion. He was an acute observer, a silent sentinel who seemed to perceive things Arthur couldn't. This hinted at a deep protective instinct, an instinct that was beginning to extend to Arthur. Remember the silence that once defined Arthur's world? It was now filled with the subtle cues of Alfie's watchful presence. The more time they spent together, the more Arthur felt the layers of his own carefully constructed isolation beginning to peel away. He found himself sharing anecdotes from his day with Alfie, recounting a frustrating meeting or a small triumph at work. He knew Alfie couldn't understand the words, but he seemed to understand the emotion. The dog would listen, head cocked, eyes steady, offering a silent, non-judgmental presence that was more comforting than any human conversation. It was during these quiet monologues that Arthur realized he hadn't truly shared his inner world with anyone in years. Alfie was, in essence, his first confidant. One evening, Arthur was working late, a looming deadline pressing down on him. He felt the familiar knot of stress in his stomach. He looked out his window, and there, below, was Alfie. It was well past their usual time, and the park was almost deserted. Alfie was simply sitting, looking up at Arthur's window. No frantic barks, no pacing, just a quiet, patient wait. Arthur felt a wave of profound gratitude wash over him. This dog wasn't demanding anything. He was simply there. He was a constant, a fixed point in Arthur's increasingly unpredictable world. He realized with a sudden clarity that he hadn't asked Alfie to stay. The dog simply chose to. This choice, this silent vigil, was a powerful testament to their bond. It was an act of profound, quiet loyalty. Is unconditional love truly limitless, or does it require constant nurturing? He hurried downstairs, a lightness in his step. Alfie greeted him with a soft wag of his tail, a quiet purr of contentment. Arthur decided then and there, this routine, this silent pact, was no longer just a habit. It was a commitment. He spent the next hour simply sitting with Alfie in the quiet park, the city lights twinkling around them like distant stars. He watched the dog, saw the subtle tension drain from his shoulders, felt the quiet peace settle in his own heart. It was an unforeseen moment of deep healing, a mutual exchange of comfort that went beyond words. This wasn't just about Arthur helping Alfie. It was profoundly about Alfie helping Arthur. The silent pact was indeed changing a man's lonely world, one quiet moment at a time. The quiet understanding between Arthur and Alfie solidified into a profound, almost telepathic connection. Arthur found himself anticipating Alfie's needs, and Alfie, in turn, seemed to know Arthur's moods before they fully formed. One morning, Arthur woke with a dull ache in his back, a familiar stiffness that usually meant a day of discomfort. He arrived at the park feeling a little grumpier than usual, his movements stiff. Alfie greeted him not with his usual gentle wag, but with a series of soft nudges, pushing his head against Arthur's hand, then nudging his side. He then lay down, presenting his belly, a clear invitation for a belly rub. Arthur, amused despite himself, obliged. As his fingers worked through Alfie's soft fur, a strange sensation spread through his own back. The tension seemed to melt, the ache diminishing. Was it the gentle movement, the warmth of Alfie's fur, or simply the unexpected moment of connection that acted as the balm? This seemingly simple interaction highlighted a fascinating aspect of the human-dog bond. the therapeutic power of touch and presence. Dogs often instinctively know how to offer comfort, whether through a nudge, a lick, or simply by resting their head on your lap. They mirror our emotions and, in doing so, help us process them. This unique, complex emotional moment of intuitive comfort from Alfie was a breakthrough for Arthur. He realized that this dog wasn't just a recipient of his kindness, he was a giver, a healer in his own quiet way. The shift in their dynamic was subtle but significant. Alfie began to initiate more of their interactions. He would sometimes lead Arthur on a slightly different route through the park, sniffing intently at a patch of grass or pausing by a particular tree. Arthur, initially a creature of habit, now found himself curious, allowing Alfie to guide him. These detours were never long, but they broke the monotony, leading Arthur to discover hidden nooks of the park he'd never noticed. A secluded bench under an ancient willow, a small fountain tucked away behind a hedge. It felt like Alfie was gently pushing Arthur to explore beyond his self-imposed boundaries, reminding him that life held more than just routine. It was a subtle humor, this dog leading the man who thought he controlled everything. One afternoon, as they walked, Alfie suddenly stopped, his body rigid, a low, almost imperceptible growl vibrating in his chest. His gaze was fixed intently on a thick patch of bushes. Arthur followed his line of sight, seeing nothing. But Alfie remained rooted, his hackles slightly raised. Arthur felt a prickle of unease. He trusted Alfie's instincts implicitly now. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, scanning the bushes. Suddenly, a frightened yelp pierced the air, and a small, trembling kitten, no bigger than Arthur's hand, stumbled out from the undergrowth, its fur matted and covered in burrs. Alfie, moments before a coiled spring of tension, immediately relaxed, letting out a soft whimper of concern. He nudged the kitten gently with his nose, then looked up at Arthur with wide, pleading eyes. This display of immediate empathy and concern for a smaller, vulnerable creature profoundly moved Arthur. It was a clear exhibition of Alfie's compassionate nature, an innate desire to protect the helpless. He scooped up the tiny kitten, feeling its delicate bones, and Alfie gently licked the kitten's head. The kitten, initially terrified, seemed to calm under Alfie's gentle ministrations. Arthur knew what he had to do. He couldn't leave it. He carefully carried the kitten, with Alfie walking protectively by his side, back to his apartment. This was an entirely new, unforeseen responsibility, a break from his perfectly ordered world. But Arthur found he didn't mind. In fact, a quiet warmth spread through him. Is compassion an instinct or a learned behavior, especially when it comes from an animal? Back at the apartment, Arthur set up a small makeshift bed for the kitten in his spare bathroom, offering it some warmed milk. Alfie lay patiently outside the door, his nose occasionally nudging it open, checking on the tiny creature. It was a domestic scene Arthur would never have imagined for himself. He, the solitary data analyst, now had a dog and a kitten under his roof. He found himself smiling, a genuine, unforced smile. He reflected that sometimes the greatest adventures aren't grand journeys to far-off lands, but the unexpected detours that lead you to a tiny, trembling life in need. Remember how Arthur once cultivated silence? Now, his apartment held the soft purrs of a kitten and the quiet sighs of a contented dog. The arrival of the kitten, whom Arthur named Pip, added another layer to their already complex silent pact. Alfie became Pip's gentle guardian, often found curled around the tiny fur ball, grooming it with tender licks. He seemed to understand Pip's fragility, moving with exaggerated slowness around him. Arthur observed this with a profound sense of awe. Alfie, who once cowered at loud noises, was now a picture of quiet bravery, protecting a creature even more vulnerable than himself. This new responsibility unexpected as it was, brought an even deeper sense of purpose to Arthur's life. His world, once so small and contained, was expanding in ways he could never have predicted, all thanks to a silent, scruffy dog he met in a park. The routine of Arthur's life, once a rigid fortress, now resembled a sprawling, comfortable home, expanded by the gentle chaos of Alfie and Pip. Mornings began with the soft thrum of a contented cat purring and the quiet sighs of a dog dreaming at the foot of his bed. Arthur found himself waking with a lighter heart, a sense of anticipation for the day's small miracles. He'd often find Alfie and Pip curled together, a testament to the unexpected harmony that had blossomed in his once empty apartment. Alfie, ever the vigilant one, would occasionally lift his head, his eyes meeting Arthur's, a silent acknowledgement of their shared domestic bliss. One afternoon, a sharp, insistent knocking rattled Arthur's apartment door. He rarely had visitors, and the unexpected sound sent a jolt of anxiety through him. Alfie, sensing Arthur's unease, immediately moved to stand protectively in front of him, a low, guttural growl rumbling deep in his chest. His hackles were raised, and his eyes, usually soft, were narrowed with fierce determination. It was a clear display of a dog's innate protective instincts, triggered by a perceived threat to their human or their home. This was an unexpected and complex emotional moment for Arthur. A realization of Alfie's fierce loyalty, coupled with a surprising surge of gratitude and even a touch of awe. Arthur cautiously opened the door to reveal a stern-faced woman in a uniform, holding a clipboard. She introduced herself as Ms. Albright from Animal Control, stating they had received reports of a stray dog in the park and, more recently, a cat being kept without proper registration. His carefully constructed world suddenly felt vulnerable, exposed. Alfie, meanwhile, remained steadfast, a furry shield, his growl a continuous low thrum. It was a tense standoff, Alfie's unwavering stance a silent defiance against the perceived threat. Does loyalty always come with a price? Or is its very existence the reward? Arthur, gathering his composure, explained that Alfie was not a stray but his companion, and that the kitten was a rescue. Ms. Albright, however, was unimpressed, citing regulations and potential fines. She insisted on seeing the animals, her gaze suspicious. Arthur felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the old fear of judgment resurfacing. He remembered the feeling of being cornered, alone. But then, he felt Alfie's warm body pressed against his leg, a silent reassurance. He looked down at Alfie, then back at Ms. Albright, a newfound resolve hardening his features. He allowed her in, but kept a close eye on Alfie, who maintained a watchful distance, his eyes tracking Ms. Albright's every move. Pip, oblivious, was still napping on a sun-drenched patch of carpet. Ms. Albright began to scrutinize the living space, her eyes sharp. She noted the clean water bowls, the plush dog bed, the cat tree Arthur had surprisingly acquired. She even noticed the small, framed photo of Alfie and Pip sleeping together on his bedside table. It was a subtle sarcasm, this official looking for negligence, finding a picture of domestic bliss. As Ms. Albright continued her inspection, she unexpectedly tripped over a throw rug, stumbling awkwardly. Before Arthur could react, Alfie, with a lightning-fast movement, darted forward and braced himself against her, preventing her from falling completely. He didn't bark, didn't growl. It was a pure, instinctual act of balance and support. Ms. Albright, startled, regained her footing, looking first at Alfie, then at Arthur, a flicker of surprise in her stern expression. It was a moment that transcended the official visit, a quiet demonstration of Alfie's true nature. The atmosphere in this room shifted. Ms. Albright, seemingly disarmed by Alfie's unexpected intervention, lowered her clipboard. She still asked questions, of course, about vaccinations and registrations, but her tone was noticeably softer, less accusatory. Arthur, feeling a surge of confidence, answered honestly and thoroughly. He even found himself sharing a brief, heartfelt account of how Alfie had come into his life and the profound impact he'd had. He mentioned the silent pact, the way Alfie had patiently waited, and how his quiet presence had slowly dismantled Arthur's solitude. Remember the man who meticulously avoided emotional connections? He was now openly sharing his deepest feelings with an official. By the time Miss Albright left, not only had she issued no fines, but she had provided Arthur with detailed information on local pet resources and even offered a quiet commendation for his care of the animals. She gave Alfie a hesitant pat on the head, which Alfie accepted with a surprising gentle lick of her hand. As the door closed, Arthur sank onto his sofa, a profound sense of relief washing over him. He looked at Alfie, who had now settled at his feet, Pip purring contentedly nearby. This dog, who had once been a symbol of his solitary observational life, had now, through quiet bravery and an unexpected display of protection, actively defended the new, softer world Arthur had built. The incident with Miss Albright, though stressful, had subtly cemented Arthur's commitment to Alfie and Pip. He found himself more open, less guarded. The fear of judgment that had long been a constant companion began to recede, replaced by a quiet confidence born of responsibility and love. He took Alfie to the vet for a full checkup, discovering the dog was older than he looked, perhaps around 8 or 9, with some mild arthritis, but otherwise remarkably healthy for a former stray. Alfie endured the examination with a stoic patience, only occasionally glancing at Arthur for reassurance. It was a silent affirmation of their bond. One sunny afternoon, Arthur took Alfie and Pip, securely in a carrier, for a picnic in a quieter section of the park. As he laid out the blanket, a small group of boisterous teenagers playing soccer nearby accidentally kicked their ball towards them. It bounced erratically, heading straight for the little carrier where Pip was dozing. Before Arthur could react, Alfie, with a burst of unexpected speed, intercepted the ball, nudging it away with his nose, diverting its path just inches from Pip's temporary sanctuary. He then looked at the teenagers, not with aggression, but with a quiet, firm stance, as if to say, "This is my family, and they are protected." This act of subtle courage and immediate protection, without a single bark or snarl, was a profound observation for Arthur. It highlighted how dogs often exhibit remarkable self-control and situational awareness, choosing appropriate responses based on the perceived threat level rather than resorting to immediate aggression. It was a nuanced display of bravery, a quiet heroism that spoke volumes. The teenagers, initially startled, quickly apologized, realizing their mistake. They even offered to retrieve the ball themselves. Alfie's silent intervention had diffused a potentially tense situation with remarkable grace. How many times do we misinterpret a quiet demeanor for a lack of strength? Later that week, Arthur was working on a complex project, the kind that demanded complete focus. He'd been feeling particularly isolated lately, a relic of his old habits creeping back in, despite Alfie and Pip's presence. He was staring blankly at his screen, a sense of creative block settling over him. Alfie, who was usually napping quietly nearby, suddenly shifted. He walked over to Arthur's desk, nudged his hand with his nose, and then, with surprising determination, took Arthur's pen gently in his mouth. He then trotted towards the window, dropping the pen at the threshold, and looked back at Arthur with an expectant gaze. It was a clear, unspoken command. "Look outside." Arthur, initially annoyed by the interruption, paused. He sighed, then pushed back his chair and walked to the window. Outside, the world was alive. Children laughed on the playground. A couple strolled hand in hand, and the leaves on the trees rustled gently in the breeze. Alfie sat beside him, looking out, then nudged Arthur's hand again. It was a profound emotional moment, a gentle intervention. Alfie wasn't asking for food or a walk. He was simply reminding Arthur to lift his head, to see beyond the confines of his work, to reconnect with the world. It was an act of subtle humor, a dog forcing his human to take a break. Arthur realized, with a jolt, that Alfie wasn't just a companion. He was a silent guide, consistently pulling him back from the brink of his own self-imposed solitude. He was teaching Arthur to re-engage, to observe, to simply be. This was the deeper meaning of their silent pact. Alfie's confession wasn't a spoken revelation, but a continuous, gentle teaching through his actions. Remember the precision of Arthur's old routine. Alfie was dismantling it, piece by quiet piece, replacing it with something richer and more fluid. That evening, Arthur took Alfie for a longer walk than usual, letting Alfie lead the way. They explored new paths, Alfie sniffing out intriguing scents, Arthur simply following, his mind clear, his heart open. He found himself noticing the textures of the bark on the trees, the intricate patterns of fallen leaves. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for this small, scruffy dog who had so quietly, yet so profoundly, rewired his world. He even started carrying a small notebook, jotting down observations, ideas, and fleeting thoughts that came to him during their walks. His creative block had vanished, replaced by a renewed sense of curiosity and inspiration. This was more than just a man walking his dog. It was a silent journey of self-discovery, guided by a furry, four-legged philosopher. Is true freedom found in control, or in letting go and trusting the unexpected? The blossoming of Arthur's inner world was matched by a subtle shift in his external interactions. He found himself greeting other park-goers with a nod, even a brief smile. He learned the names of the regular dog walkers, exchanging pleasantries about the weather or a particularly beautiful sunset. This was a man who once navigated the world with averted eyes, and now he was making connections, small but significant. Alfie, ever the catalyst, would often offer a gentle wag or a soft nudge to those who paused to admire him, acting as Arthur's furry ambassador. It was a gentle humor how this silent dog was teaching a recluse to socialize. One blustery autumn morning, a sudden gust of wind tore a little girl's brightly colored kite from her grasp. It soared wildly, then snagged high in the branches of the tallest oak tree in the park. The little girl, no older than 7, burst into tears, her mother attempting to console her, but the kite was far out of reach. Arthur, witnessing the scene, felt a familiar pang of helplessness. His old self would have simply walked past, avoiding the emotional entanglement. But something had changed. He felt Alfie stir beside him, his gaze fixed on the distressed child. Alfie, without a sound, trotted over to the weeping girl. He sat patiently in front of her, then nudged her hand with his nose. When she looked at him, he emitted a soft, reassuring whine, and then, slowly, he nudged her small, tear-streaked face with his wet nose, almost like a kiss. The girl, surprised, giggled through her tears, reaching out to stroke Alfie's head. This unexpected moment of comfort, a dog instinctively understanding and alleviating human distress, was a profound, emotional moment. It highlighted how dogs possess an incredible capacity for empathy, often sensing and responding to human sadness or fear with soothing gestures. What truly defines a helper, if not the ability to offer solace when it's most needed? Inspired by Alfie's gentle intervention, Arthur found himself approaching the mother. Perhaps, he suggested, surprising himself with his own audacity. If we could find something to extend, we might reach it. Together, they found a long, discarded branch. With Alfie sitting patiently below, watching intently, Arthur managed to dislodge the kite, sending it fluttering down into the girl's waiting arms. The child's joyful squeal was a sound Arthur hadn't realized he'd been missing in his life. The mother thanked him profusely, and even Alfie received a grateful pat. This small act of collective problem-solving, spurred by Alfie's empathy, solidified Arthur's growing sense of connection to his community. As the days grew shorter and colder, Arthur found himself worrying about Alfie's comfort. Despite the dog's seeming resilience, Arthur decided it was time for Alfie to fully transition from the park to the warmth of his home. He spent days preparing, buying a proper dog bed, durable toys, and even a small, cozy sweater for Alfie's arthritic joints. He discussed it with Alfie in his usual quiet murmurs, explaining the benefits of indoor living. Alfie would listen, head cocked, eyes unwavering, as if understanding every word. The evening Arthur finally brought Alfie inside permanently was momentous. Alfie walked in with a dignified calm, sniffing every corner of the apartment, his tail giving a slow, continuous wag. Pip, the kitten, approached cautiously, then rubbed against Alfie's leg, a warm welcome. Alfie settled into his new bed with a contented sigh, his eyes meeting Arthur's, a silent acknowledgement of the new chapter. It was a beautiful culmination of their silent pact, a full acceptance of each other into their lives. Remember the man who lived in a meticulously ordered, solitary apartment? Now it was a home, filled with the gentle sounds of breathing and the quiet presence of beloved companions. Arthur found particular joy in watching Alfie and Pip interact. They would chase each other in playful skirmishes, Pip batting at Alfie's tail, Alfie gently nudging Pip with his nose. Their unlikely friendship was a constant source of amusement and wonder. He often mused on the paradox of how these two small creatures, so different, could find such profound companionship. It reflected his own journey, he realized, how he, the solitary man, had found companionship in the most unexpected of places. Is true happiness found in predictability, or in embracing the beautiful chaos of connection? Life with Alfie and Pip settled into a comfortable rhythm, a symphony of soft purrs, gentle snores, and the quiet tapping of paws on hardwood floors. Arthur's apartment, once a sterile sanctuary, now exuded warmth and life. He found himself leaving his laptop more often, choosing instead to simply observe the quiet interactions between his two companions. Pip would bat playfully at Alfie's wagging tail, and Alfie, with remarkable patience, would tolerate the kitten's antics, occasionally nudging him back with a gentle paw. It was a constant source of quiet joy, a daily reminder of the unexpected blessings in his life. One evening, as Arthur was preparing dinner, a sudden, sharp pain flared in his chest. It wasn't excruciating, but it was enough to make him gasp, leaning against the counter for support. Alfie, who had been dozing in his bed, was instantly alert. He rose, came to Arthur's side, and nudged his hand with his wet nose, a deep, concerned whine rumbling in his chest. His eyes, fixed on Arthur's face, held an intensity that was almost unnerving. It was a clear demonstration of a dog's ability to perceive subtle physiological changes in their human, often sensing illness or distress before any verbal cues are given. This profound emotional moment, Alfie's immediate and unwavering concern, brought tears to Arthur's eyes. In that instant, he wasn't just a pet owner. He was a recipient of selfless devotion. Arthur, downplaying the pain, tried to reassure Alfie, but the dog remained insistent. He continued to nudge Arthur, then began to pace agitatedly between Arthur and the front door, looking back at him with worried glances. It was a silent, persistent plea. Arthur, though reluctant to admit any weakness, recognized the urgency in Alfie's demeanor. He knew this wasn't just a dog being protective. It was a deeper, more profound communication. "You think I should go, don't you, boy?" he murmured, and Alfie responded with a firm, affirmative bark, rare for him. This insistent push, this subtle humor of a dog telling his human what to do, was undeniable. Reluctantly, Arthur decided to listen. He grabbed his keys and wallet, Alfie circling his legs with an almost desperate energy. Pip, sensing the change in atmosphere, watched from a safe distance, his eyes wide. At the emergency room, the pain subsided somewhat, making Arthur feel foolish, as if he had overreacted. But then, after a quick examination, the doctor, a calm woman named Dr. Evelyn Hayes, informed him that he'd experienced a transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke. It was a warning, she explained, a sign of something more serious if not addressed. Had he ignored Alfie, he might have dismissed the symptoms, with potentially dire consequences. He sat there, stunned. He looked at his phone, a picture of Alfie and Pip as his background. He realized, with a powerful jolt, that Alfie had not only sensed his distress, but had insisted on intervention. This was more than just companionship. It was a profound act of life-saving guidance. How often do we ignore the subtle wisdom of those who cannot speak? The following weeks were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, tests, and lifestyle changes. Arthur was put on medication, advised to drastically alter his diet, and perhaps most challenging for his solitary nature, encouraged to incorporate more regular, moderate exercise into his routine. It was overwhelming, a complete upheaval of the carefully managed life he had built. He felt vulnerable, exposed, and at times, deeply afraid. Through it all, Alfie remained his steadfast companion. He seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. During Arthur's walks, Alfie would set a slow, steady pace, never pulling, always attuned to Arthur's breathing and energy levels. He was a silent monitor, a gentle encourager. He would rest his head on Arthur's lap during moments of fatigue, offering a quiet, comforting presence that eased the anxiety. This period of recovery, though challenging, revealed the limitless resilience of their bond. Remember the anxiety that often plagued Arthur? It was now being systematically dismantled by the unwavering presence of his silent guardian. One evening, Arthur was feeling particularly low, tired of the restrictions, the constant vigilance. He looked at Alfie, who was curled up beside him, a picture of serene contentment. "You know, Alfie," he murmured, "you saved my life. You really did." Alfie responded with a soft sigh, resting his head more firmly against Arthur's leg. In that quiet moment, Arthur understood that the silent pact wasn't just about sharing space or companionship. It was about mutual reliance, about a bond so deep it could transcend the boundaries of species. It was a beautiful, unexpected journey of self-discovery, fueled by a dog's unwavering loyalty. Arthur's recovery became a shared journey, a testament to the quiet strength of the bond he shared with Alfie. The new routines, initially daunting, slowly became second nature. Daily walks were no longer a chore, but a cherished time of connection where Arthur pushed his limits gently, guided by Alfie's steady pace. He learned to appreciate the subtle cues of his own body, much like he had learned to interpret Alfie's silent language. Pip, ever the playful spirit, added a layer of lightheartedness, often joining their outdoor excursions in his carrier, purring contentedly as the world drifted by. One brisk morning, as they walked in the park, Arthur noticed a small group of volunteers setting up a pet adoption drive stand. His old self would have hurried past, but now, a flicker of an idea, a nascent desire to give back, stirred within him. He watched Alfie, trotting confidently beside him, a symbol of resilience and the transformative power of a second chance. He thought of the countless other animals like Alfie, waiting for their own silent pact, their own human connection. This was a profound observation, the realization that their story, once intensely personal, held a universal message of hope. He approached the stand, a little nervous but determined. He spoke to a kind-faced volunteer named Clara, sharing a condensed version of his journey with Alfie. He explained how Alfie had, in his quiet way, pulled him out of isolation and even saved his life. Clara listened intently, her eyes widening with genuine emotion. She shared stories of other animals, some with similar backgrounds, some with unique challenges, all yearning for a home. This unexpected conversation, fueled by Arthur's newfound openness, was a significant departure from his previously guarded nature. It was a subtle humor, this man who avoided people now advocating for homeless animals. Arthur discovered that many of the animals at the shelter suffered from behavioral issues stemming from past trauma, similar to Alfie's occasional fear responses. He learned about the patience and specialized training required to help these animals heal and trust again. He realized that Alfie's journey wasn't unique in its adversity, but perhaps in the depth of the human connection that had fostered his recovery. This highlighted a deep factual detail about dog behavior. Trauma, much like in humans, can manifest as behavioral challenges in dogs, and consistent, patient love is often the most effective form of rehabilitation. What truly defines healing? The absence of wounds, or the courage to live beyond them? Inspired by the discussions, Arthur began volunteering a few hours a week at the local animal shelter. He started with simple tasks, cleaning kennels, organizing supplies. But soon, he gravitated towards the quieter, more fearful dogs, the ones who reminded him of Alfie. He would sit patiently with them, speaking in soft murmurs, offering a gentle hand, just as he had with Alfie in those early days in the park. He felt a profound sense of purpose, a calling he never knew he possessed. Each small step, each timid tail wag, each tentative lick from a scared dog was a profound emotional moment, a validation of the healing power of presence. He discovered that the act of giving back, of extending compassion to others, was immensely therapeutic for his own recovery. The focus shifted from his internal struggles to the needs of these vulnerable creatures. He found a strange solace in the repetitive tasks, a meditative quality in the quiet moments shared with a trembling paw in his hand. His anxiety, which had lingered even after the mini-stroke, began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of calm accomplishment. Remember the silence that once stifled Arthur? It was now filled with the quiet hope of a shelter, the soft breathing of waiting animals. His colleagues at work noticed the change. Arthur, once reserved and distant, was now more engaged, more approachable. He even shared a story about Alfie during a team meeting, something he would never have done before. They saw a man who was not just recovering physically, but flourishing emotionally. His manager, a keen observer, commented, "You seem lighter, Arthur. Good to see." Arthur simply smiled, knowing the silent force behind this transformation. The silent pact was no longer just about two beings. It was expanding, rippling outwards, touching others in subtle, positive ways. The animal shelter became a new cornerstone of Arthur's life, a place where his quiet nature found profound purpose. He wasn't the boisterous type who could rally a crowd, but he excelled at the quiet, one-on-one connections that truly mattered. He became known as the dog whisperer among the volunteers, the one who could sit with the most withdrawn, the most fearful animals, and slowly, patiently, coax them out of their shells. He saw echoes of his own past in their guarded eyes, and he understood the immense power of a silent, trusted presence. This continuous, empathetic work was truly fulfilling. One particularly cold winter evening, a new arrival was brought to the shelter, a severely neglected border collie mix, emaciated and terrified, found wandering the highways. The dog, named Shadow by the shelter staff due to his extreme shyness, cowered in the back of his kennel, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't respond to gentle coaxing. The staff were worried. His health was deteriorating rapidly from stress. It was a profound challenge, and Arthur felt a deep ache in his chest, recognizing the deep despair in Shadow's eyes. Arthur spent hours with Shadow, simply sitting outside his kennel, reading a book aloud in a soft, even tone. He didn't try to touch him, didn't try to force interaction. He simply was there, a steady, non-threatening presence. He brought Alfie with him sometimes, letting Alfie lie calmly outside the kennel, a silent testament to the possibility of trust. Alfie, sensing Shadow's profound fear, remained incredibly still, his gentle demeanor radiating calm. This profound observation of Alfie's intuition and quiet leadership demonstrated how dogs can often rehabilitate each other through modeling calm behavior and nonverbal cues, a powerful form of canine therapy. Days turned into a week, and then, one afternoon, as Arthur was reading, a small, tentative nose poked out from beneath Shadow's blanket. Then, a cautious eye met Arthur's. It was fleeting, but it was a beginning. Arthur responded with a soft, almost imperceptible smile. He continued reading, his voice a steady drone, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, Shadow began to emerge. First, he ate a little, then allowed Arthur to place a food bowl just inside the kennel. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks, Shadow took a tentative step out of his kennel when Arthur arrived, his tail giving a tiny, almost invisible wag. It was an unparalleled emotional moment, a quiet victory in the face of profound adversity. What truly defines resilience? Surviving the storm, or finding the courage to step into the sun? Arthur's life had come full circle. He, the man who once lived in a silent, self-imposed exile, was now orchestrating miracles of trust and healing for other lost souls. He watched Alfie and Pip at home, curled together in peaceful slumber, and felt a profound sense of contentment. The silent pact he had formed with Alfie in that park had not only saved his own life, but had given him the purpose to save others. The echoes of his past loneliness were long gone, replaced by the rich, comforting symphony of a life lived with connection and compassion. One evening, Arthur sat on his sofa, Alfie curled at his feet, Pip nestled on his lap. He thought about the journey, from the solitary man in a precise routine to the person he was now, surrounded by warmth and purpose. He realized that Alfie's confession wasn't a secret revealed, but a truth lived. The profound, transformative power of unconditional love and loyalty. It was a truth delivered not in words, but in quiet nudges, steadfast gazes, and an unwavering presence. Their silent pact had indeed changed a man's lonely world forever, leaving a legacy of healing and boundless love. As the last golden rays of the setting sun filter through the window, they cast a soft, warm glow across the living room. You see Alfie, stretched out contentedly on his favorite plush rug, a gentle sigh escaping him as he drifts deeper into dreams. His fur, once matted and dull, now gleams with health, a testament to the love that surrounds him. Pip, curled in a tiny ball beside Alfie's larger form, purrs a soft, rhythmic lullaby, her small body rising and falling with Alfie's steady breathing. There is a palpable sense of peace in the room, a quiet harmony that settles deep within your own being. Imagine the comforting weight of a warm blanket, the gentle sound of soft breathing, the profound security of knowing you are exactly where you are meant to be. This is the enduring strength of connection, a whisper of love that transcends all understanding, cradling you in its boundless warmth.